Greetings, warriors and dreamers. Welcome to the realms of sleep, where tonight we journey through the epic world of God of War. I am your guide through the 9 realms, where ancient gods whisper their secrets and mythic landscapes unfold before us. From the frost-covered mountains of Midgard to the golden halls of Asgard, these tales of gods and giants will carry you into peaceful slumber. Lay down your weapons, rest your weary head, and allow the legends of these powerful beings to become the landscape of your dreams. The battles have been fought, and now is the time for rest. So close your eyes, brave one. Let the fire of the hearth warm you as we begin our journey through realms both wondrous and dangerous. The last light of day filtered through the ancient pines as Kratos and Atreus followed a narrow path toward the sound of flowing water. They had traveled since mid-morning, ever eastward, guided by directions from Freya that had led them away from familiar hunting grounds to this secluded valley. The air carried a subtle sweetness, night-blooming flowers preparing to open as darkness approached, their fragrance mixing with the earthy scent of pine and flowing water. "Are you certain this is necessary?" Kratos asked, his deep voice low as they navigated the descending trail. Though his tone remained neutral, Atreus had learned to detect the subtle concern beneath his father's stoicism. "Freya said it would help me understand the Vanir better," Atreus replied, fingering the small leather pouch hanging from his belt. "A gift from the goddess, containing materials for the evening's ceremony." And she thought. He hesitated, always careful when mentioning his mother. "She thought Mother would have wanted me to experience this tradition." Kratos offered no immediate response, but his pace remained steady as they continued downward. Months had passed since they had scattered Faye's ashes atop the highest peak in all the realms, yet her absence remained a presence between them, not as raw as before, but transformed into something different. A shared memory that shaped their journey in ways both spoken and unspoken. The path widened as they descended into the valley, revealing glimpses of water through the trees, a river that meandered lazily between gently sloping banks. Unlike the rushing torrents that carved through rocky highlands, this waterway moved with deliberate calm, its surface reflecting the deepening blue of the evening sky. "The River Igra," Atreus identified, recalling Freya's description. "Named after an ancient Vanir who sacrificed herself to heal these lands during a time of blight. The Vanir believe her spirit still flows within the water, nurturing everything that grows along its banks." "Another god story," Kratos observed, though without the dismissive edge that would have colored such comments earlier in their journey. Experience had taught him that many such tales contained kernels of truth, however obscured by generations of retelling. "Not merely a story, brother," Mimir interjected from his position at Kratos' belt. "The Vanir have always maintained a more intimate relationship with natural forces than other pantheons. Where the Aesir seek to conquer and control, the Vanir recognize reciprocity, mutual nourishment between deity and devotee." "Freya told me Igra was a healer," Adonis added, his natural curiosity engaging with the tale. "When a poison seeped into the land from Jotunheim's borders, nothing would grow, and the people began to sicken. She traveled to each affected region, using her knowledge of plants and water to cleanse the soil. But the poison was too strong, too pervasive. And so she made the ultimate sacrifice," Mimir concluded, "dissolved her immortal essence into the waterways, becoming one with them so that her healing power could reach every tributary, every droplet that nourished the land. Quite remarkable, even by divine standards of heroism. As they neared the river's edge, Atreus noticed subtle changes in the surrounding vegetation. Reeds with slender stalks lined the banks, crowned with bulbs that remained tightly closed but seemed to pulse gently with inner light. Strange flowers grew between the reeds, blossoms with translucent petals that gradually became more visible as daylight faded, emitting a soft luminescence in shades of pale blue and silver. Night flowers, Atreus identified, kneeling to examine one without touching its delicate structure. Mimir mentioned these. They bloom only after sunset and close before dawn. The Vanir use their nectar for certain rituals. The boy grows more knowledgeable by the day, observed Mimir with evident pleasure. Those particular blooms are called star catchers in the old Vanir tongue, said to capture fallen starlight and return it to the sky each dawn. How do flowers catch stars? Atreus asked, studying the unusual blooms with heightened interest. Not literal stars, of course, Mimir clarified, but certain energies that descend from the night sky. Cosmic influences that the ancient Vanir believed contained wisdom or awareness from beyond the 9 realms. These flowers absorb such energies during their nocturnal blooming, then release them upward again as they close at daybreak. A continuous cycle of exchange between terrestrial and celestial realms. Further discussion paused as they emerged from the tree line into a small clearing beside the river. Here the bank widened into a crescent-shaped beach of fine, pale sand that glowed softly in the fading light. Several fallen logs had been arranged in a semicircle facing the water, creating simple seating for those who might gather at this spot. But what caught Atratta's immediate attention was the presence of another visitor. A small figure seated at the water's edge, hands moving with practiced precision over what appeared to be delicate constructions of paper and wood. As they approached, the figure looked up, revealing a child perhaps a few years younger than Atreus, with features that suggested Vanir heritage. Eyes slightly tilted at the corners, hair the color of autumn leaves, skin with a subtle golden undertone that seemed to capture and hold the last rays of evening light. "You've come for the remembering," the child said, voice neither distinctly masculine nor feminine, but carrying a musical quality characteristic of the Vanir. Not a question, but a simple acknowledgement. "The Lady of the Wood said you might." "Yes," Atreus replied, moving forward while Kratos remained at the edge of the clearing, maintaining watchful distance. "I'm Atreus. This is my father. And that's Mimir," he added, gesturing toward the head at Kratos' belt. "I am Linde," the child responded with a slight inclination of their head. "My family tends this stretch of the Egra. I come each evening to prepare the vessels and welcome those who wish to participate." They gestured toward the materials spread before them on a piece of woven cloth. Squares of thin paper in various pale colors, slender sticks of lightweight wood, small stone cups containing what appeared to be oil or wax, and lengths of delicate thread. Atreus settled cross-legged on the sand beside Lindy, curiously examining the partially completed constructions. They resembled small boats or perhaps flowers, with paper folded to create cup-like structures supported by the wooden sticks. "Lanterns," Lindy explained, noting his interest. "We fold them, so..." Their hands moved with fluid grace, demonstrating how a square of paper could be transformed through a series of precise folds. The base holds the light. The sides direct it upward while protecting the flame from wind. When complete, they float upon the water, carrying memories along the river's path. "Memories?" Atreus asked, already attempting to mimic Lindy's folding technique, with a sheet of pale blue paper from his own pouch. "Each lantern carries a memory," Lind confirmed, adjusting Atreus' fingers to correct a fold. "A moment you wish to honor, to remember with gratitude, or perhaps..." They hesitated briefly. "Perhaps to release, if the holding of it has become a burden." From his position near the tree line, Kratos observed the interaction with outward impassivity but internal alertness. Though Freya had assured them this ritual posed no danger, merely a peaceful Vanir tradition practiced during the autumn equinox, his warrior's instincts remained vigilant. Yet he recognized the value in allowing Atreus this experience, particularly given Faye's apparent desire that her son understand his heritage beyond the harsh lessons of survival. The boy had adapted to their dangerous world with surprising resilience, developing combat skills that complemented Kratos' own while maintaining a curiosity and compassion that sometimes bewildered his father. These qualities Kratos attributed primarily to Faye's influence, her gentle wisdom providing counterbalance to his own harsh pragmatism during Atreus' formative years. Perhaps this ritual, with its focus on deliberate remembrance rather than strategic forgetting, might offer the boy something Kratos himself could not provide, a way to honor the pain of loss without being consumed by it. If Faye had indeed wished her son to participate in this tradition, she must have believed it would serve some purpose in his development, in his understanding of himself and his place within the world's complex tapestry. "Your father may join us if he wishes," Lindy offered, glancing toward Kratos with respectful acknowledgement, rather than the fear his imposing presence typically inspired. Many find comfort in the remembering, even those unaccustomed to Vanir ways. Kratos made no move to approach, merely inclining his head slightly to acknowledge the invitation without accepting it. His reluctance stemmed not from disdain, but from an instinctive wariness regarding divine rituals of any kind. Too many had proven manipulative or dangerous throughout his long existence. Better to maintain vigilant distance while allowing Atreus the experience that Faye had apparently valued. As twilight deepened into early evening, more changes became apparent along the riverbank. The night flowers opened fully, their luminescence intensifying to cast pools of silver-blue light across the water's surface. The bulbs atop the reeds unfurled into delicate, trumpet-shaped blossoms that emitted a pale golden glow. Together, these natural lights transformed the riverside into an enchanted landscape, poised between mundane reality and something more ethereal. "The river awakens," Lindy said softly, their voice blending with the gentle sounds of flowing water. "Now is the time to prepare your mind, while your hands complete the vessel." Atreus continued the methodical folding of his lantern, now working with greater confidence as his fingers learned the patterns. Yet his expression grew thoughtful, almost troubled, as he considered Lindy's words about selecting a memory to accompany the light. "There are so many," he confessed, almost to himself. "How do I choose just one?" "The memory chooses you," Linda replied with the simple wisdom of one repeating ancient knowledge. "As you work, as your hands create, your heart will know which moment seeks expression tonight. It may not be what you expect. Sometimes the smallest moments carry the greatest significance." The riverbank had grown quieter as darkness settled more completely across the valley. Nocturnal creatures occasionally rustled in undergrowth beyond the circle of natural illumination provided by the glowing flowers, while the water's continuous flow created gentle background music, not a single sound, but a complex harmony of currents moving at different speeds around rocks and fallen branches, creating ripples that caught and reflected the flower's soft radiance. "The Igras speaks many languages," Lindy observed, noting Atreus' attention to these subtle sounds. The voice of stone against water, the whisper of current meeting shore, the silent communication between surface and depth. When we listen with patience, patterns emerge from what initially seems merely random noise. Atreus nodded, recognizing truth in this observation. His developing awareness of the natural world had increasingly revealed such patterns, the different qualities of silence in forest versus meadow, the subtle shifts in wind that preceded weather changes, the barely perceptible vibrations that sometimes indicated underground water sources or hollow spaces beneath apparently solid ground. "Mother taught me to listen to the trees," he shared, continuing his careful folding while memories surfaced unbidden. "She said each species speaks differently. Pine with its constant murmur, oak with deeper resonance, birch with higher, more delicate tones. When they grow together, they create conversations that continue across seasons, across years." "Your mother understood the old ways," Lende responded with evident respect. Few outsiders develop such sensitivities without Vanir blood or training. They studied Atreus with curious assessment. Yet you carry this awareness naturally, as if born to it. This observation touched upon complexities regarding Atreus' heritage that remained partially unresolved despite revelations during their journey. His mother's Jotnar lineage had become clear, yet much about her connection to different realms and traditions remained mysterious. That she would want him to experience specifically Vanir rituals suggested connections beyond what had been explicitly shared. The conversation paused as both children focused on completing their lanterns. Lindy's hands moved with practiced efficiency, creating one vessel after another with slight variations in design that seemed guided by intuitive rather than mechanical repetition. Atreus worked more deliberately, his single lantern taking shape with careful attention to each fold, each positioning of the supporting sticks, each securing of delicate thread. From his position near the tree line, Kratos watched this process with unexpected memories surfacing from his own distant past. Long before godhood, before warfare had consumed his life, he recalled observing his own father constructing fishing nets, hands moving with similar methodical patience, creating functional beauty from simple materials. The recollection came without the usual accompanying surge of bitterness or regret, merely a neutral image emerging briefly before returning to the depths from which it had arisen. "Tell me more about the remembering," Atreus requested as his lantern neared completion. "Is it always done alone, or do families sometimes participate together?" "Both have value," Lindy replied, setting aside another finished vessel. "Some memories belong uniquely to individuals and seek expression through solitary offering. Others represent shared experiences that family groups or even entire communities might honor collectively. During significant transitions, seasonal changes, community milestones, periods following collective hardship or celebration, the entire village might gather along the river, hundreds of lanterns illuminating the water simultaneously. And the river spirits, do they always appear? They manifest according to their own rhythms, their own purposes, Lindeth explained. Sometimes barely perceptible as ripples or brief glimmers beneath the surface, other times appearing more distinctly, particularly when memories offered carry strong emotional resonance or significance beyond individual experience. They glanced toward Kratos momentarily. Warriors' memories often draw powerful response, perhaps because they carry heightened awareness of life's precariousness, its precious transience. This observation seemed to briefly capture Kratos' attention, though his expression remained unreadable in the gathering darkness. He had positioned himself against a massive pine trunk, its rough bark at his back providing tactical advantage. Clear sight lines across the clearing while minimizing his own visibility and allowing quick response to potential threats from any direction. Old habits persisted despite the peaceful setting. "Does everyone who participates choose happy memories?" Atreus asked, voice quieter now, almost hesitant. "Or can they be sad ones too?" "All authentic experience deserves acknowledgement," Lindy responded without judgment. "Joy, sorrow, accomplishment, regret, each shapes who we become. The Igra receives all offerings with equal acceptance without categorizing as humans might. Water flows around obstacles without resistance, adapting to whatever it encounters. So too does the river's awareness embrace the full spectrum of mortal experience." Kratos, overhearing this exchange, found himself unexpectedly affected by the concept. Throughout his long existence, he had practiced forgetting rather than remembering, pushing painful memories deep beneath layers of stoic detachment. The notion of deliberately selecting a memory for contemplation, for honoring, seemed foreign to his nature. Yet he recognized how Atreus, with Faye's guidance, had developed a different relationship to the past, one that acknowledged pain without being consumed by it. As darkness settled more completely across the valley, Lindy began lighting the completed lanterns. Using a slender stick of resinous wood that burned with a steady flame, they carefully ignited the small cups of oil nestled within each paper structure. The lanterns glowed from within, some emitting soft gold light, others pale violet or gentle blue, depending on the color of paper used in their construction. "The colors carry meaning," Lindy explained as they worked. "Gold for joy and gratitude, blue for wisdom gained through challenge, violet for love that transcends separation." They glanced briefly at Atreus. "The Lady of the Wood provided materials for your vessel. She chose well." Atreus examined the nearly completed lantern in his hands, noting how the pale lavender paper seemed to intensify the light from within, creating a gentle radiance that felt simultaneously sorrowful and comforting. He had not consciously selected this particular sheet from his pouch, yet something about its color resonated with emotions he could not fully articulate. "I think I know which memory belongs here," he said quietly, surprising himself with the certainty that had crystallized during the meditative process of creation. As Lind continued lighting lanterns, the riverbank's transformation accelerated. The glowing flowers and reeds had intensified their illumination, creating a landscape where shadows and light engaged in continuous gentle dance. The water's surface reflected these luminous points, doubling their effect while adding rippling movement that transformed static patterns into flowing tapestries of light. Beyond the river's edge, new movements became visible as full darkness embraced the landscape. Subtle ripples disturbed the water's surface where no physical object could be detected. Occasionally, faint luminous forms appeared briefly above the gentle current, suggestions of humanoid shapes composed of water and light that emerged momentarily before dissolving back into the flow. "River spirits," Mimir identified in a hushed tone when Atreus glanced questioningly toward him. Or, perhaps more accurately, manifestations of the river's consciousness. The Vanir don't distinguish between deity and natural force the way other pantheons might. To them, the river itself possesses awareness, the capacity to receive, to witness, to remember. Lindy nodded agreement. "The Igra accepts our offerings of memory and light, carries them downriver to where the waters join the sea. Nothing is lost, merely transformed, as water itself transforms from river to ocean to cloud to rain, returning always to its source." With the last of the lanterns completed and lit, Lindy rose gracefully to their feet, gathering several of the glowing vessels. Now we release them to the current. Come." Atreus followed, cradling his own lantern carefully to protect its flame from the slight breeze that occasionally stirred across the water's surface. At the river's edge, where small wavelets lapped gently against the sandy shore, Linde demonstrated how to set the lanterns afloat, a careful placement rather than careless tossing, with a subtle push to guide each vessel into the gentle current. "As you release it, hold your chosen memory clearly in your thoughts," they instructed. "See it, feel it, acknowledge its significance. Then let the river carry it, not away from you forever, but into the greater flow that connects all moments, all lives." One by one, Lindy released their lanterns, each following a slightly different path as the river's subtle currents guided them. The glowing vessels created points of colorful light against the dark water, reflections doubling their radiance as they drifted gradually downstream. Then it was Atreus's turn. He knelt at the water's edge, his lantern cupped carefully between his palms. Its violet light illuminated his features from below, highlighting the intensity of his expression as he focused on his chosen memory. For several heartbeats, he remained motionless, eyes closed, lips moving slightly in silent communication. Then, with gentle deliberation, he placed the lantern on the water's surface and guided it forward with fingertips that lingered momentarily before allowing the current to claim the glowing vessel. From his position several paces back, Kratos observed his son's ritual with uncharacteristic emotion stirring beneath his stoic exterior. Though he could not know precisely which memory Atreus had chosen, something in the boy's posture, a combination of sorrow and reverence, suggested it involved Faye. Perhaps a moment shared between mother and son during those years when Kratos had remained distant, even within their small family circle. The god of war had never been given to sentimentality, viewing emotional attachment primarily as vulnerability to be guarded against rather than connection to be cultivated. Yet witnessing his son's deliberate honoring of memory, choosing to engage with loss rather than suppress it, stirred conflicted recognition. Perhaps there existed strength in this approach that differed from his own practiced detachment, but served similar purpose. Survival not merely of body, but of something deeper, more essential to what defined a being beyond mere continuation. As Atreus's lantern joined others already flowing downstream, something unexpected occurred. The river spirits, previously visible only as occasional ripples or fleeting suggestions of form, emerged more distinctly near the floating lights. Translucent figures composed of flowing water and subtle luminescence. They moved alongside the lanterns, sometimes reaching out with limbs that seemed more impression than substance, to touch the glowing vessels with evident curiosity or appreciation. Most surprising, however, was the sound that now emanated from the river itself. A gentle humming that gradually resolved into something more melodic. Not quite song in the conventional sense, but patterned vibrations that resonated with emotional qualities, peacefulness, acceptance, gratitude, and beneath these, a subtle current of joyful recognition. "They're singing," Soraeus whispered, transfixed by the spectacle. "The river acknowledges the offerings," Linde confirmed. "Each memory joins the Yggdra's own remembering, becomes part of the greater flow that has witnessed countless lives, countless moments of significance. Nothing truly ends here, it merely transforms." The melodic humming intensified as more lanterns entered the water, creating harmonies that seemed to vibrate not merely through air but through flesh and bone, touching something beyond ordinary hearing. These sound patterns carried no discernible words, yet somehow conveyed meaning, impressions of continuity, of cycles completing and beginning simultaneously. of individual experience joining collective awareness without losing its unique significance. They sing to each memory differently, Lindy explained, voice softening to blend with the ambient melodies. Listen carefully to the patterns responding to your own offering. They reflect how the river receives what you've shared, how it resonates within the greater flow. Atreus focused his attention on the sounds surrounding his floating lantern, now several yards downstream but still clearly visible by its distinctive violet glow. The harmonic patterns accompanying it seemed more complex than those around other vessels, layered tones that sometimes aligned in perfect consonance before diverging into brief, bittersweet dissonance that resolved into new harmonies. "It's beautiful," he said softly. "Sad, but also peaceful somehow. Like the sadness isn't fighting against anything anymore." "A wise observation," Mimir commented from his position at Kratos' belt, the head having remained uncharacteristically quiet during much of the ceremony. "Resistance often amplifies suffering. Acceptance, not dismissal or suppression, but genuine acknowledgement, allows pain to transform, to become something that flows rather than solidifies." As they watched, the lanterns continued their journey downstream, gradually gathering into patterns that seemed not entirely random. Currents guided certain vessels together while separating others, creating configurations that resembled constellations reflected upon the water's surface. The river spirits moved among these floating light partners, their translucent forms occasionally merging with particular lanterns in what appeared to be moments of communion or absorption. "Look there," Linde said softly, pointing toward a bend in the river where the floating lights created a particularly complex arrangement. "The Igra weaves the memories into new patterns, finding connections between moments that may have seemed separate. This is why we come, why we remember together. What appears isolated in our individual experience reveals its connections when viewed from the river's perspective." Atreus' lantern had joined a cluster of others, their combined light creating a pool of violet and gold radiance that moved slowly around a gentle eddy before continuing downstream. Several river spirits hovered near this configuration, their humming intensifying to create harmonic patterns that resonated pleasantly in the chest and throat. "They like your memory," Linde observed, glancing at Atreus with evident approval. "Some offerings resonate more strongly with the river's awareness, moments of particular authenticity or significance." Atreus nodded, unable to fully articulate the complex emotions stirred by watching his memory, symbolized by the glowing lantern, join this greater communion of light and flowing water. There was sorrow, certainly, in acknowledging what had been lost. Yet something else emerged alongside it, a sense of continuity, of connection that transcended physical presence or absence. "I never thought remembering could feel like this," he said finally, voice barely audible above the water's gentle movement and the spirit's melodic humming. "Less like looking backward and more like..." He searched for words adequate to the experience. "More like recognizing something that continues, even if its form has changed." From his position near the tree line, Kratos absorbed this observation with unexpected resonance. Throughout centuries of existence, he had practiced strategic forgetting, burying painful memories beneath layers of stoic detachment, viewing remembrance primarily as weakness that compromised survival. Yet witnessing his son's experience suggested alternative perspective, that certain kinds of remembering might strengthen rather than diminish, might connect rather than isolate. The river spirits continued their dance around the floating lanterns, occasionally gathering around particular vessels with heightened interest before dispersing into more general patterns of movement. Their translucent forms seemed to grow more defined as the night deepened, features becoming discernible within the watery substance that composed them. Not individualized faces, but suggestions of expression, curiosity, welcome, contemplative appreciation. "Do they remember too?" Atreus asked, watching a particularly luminous spirit hover near his drifting lantern. "Or are they just the river's way of witnessing our memories?" "Both, in the Vanir understanding," Linde replied. "The spirits embody the river's accumulated awareness, every moment it has witnessed, every life that has touched its waters, every story carried upon its currents. They serve as bridge between individual memory and collective remembering, helping transform personal experience into something that nourishes the greater whole." Several spirits had begun moving in synchronous patterns around Atreus' lantern, and those that had joined it in the gentle eddy. Their coordinated movements resembled formal dance, not random motion but purposeful choreography that created shifting geometric patterns in perfect harmony with the musical vibrations that continued emanating from the river itself. "They're welcoming your mother," Mimir observed quietly, his magical perception apparently allowing insights beyond what physical senses alone might detect. "Not summoning her spirit in the crude manner of necromancers, but acknowledging her presence within the memory you've offered. Quite beautiful, really. A recognition that those we remember continue existing within our consciousness, not as mere echoes, but as living influences that shape how we perceive and engage with present experience." This interpretation aligned with what Atreus felt but had struggled to articulate. The sense that his chosen memory of Faye somehow made her momentarily present, not as ghost or illusion, but as essential influence that remained active within his developing identity. Not merely recollection of what had been, but living connection that continued shaping what might yet become. As the lanterns drifted farther downstream, their individual lights gradually merging into collective glow that illuminated the river's surface in patches of gold, blue, and violet, Linde turned toward Atreus with gentle inquiry. "Some choose to follow their lanterns along the riverbank for a distance," they offered. "Others prefer to remain at the launch point, allowing distance to develop between offering and observer. Both approaches have value within the ritual. What feels right to you?" Atreus considered this choice, instinctively glancing toward his father before responding. Though Kratos made no obvious gesture, something in his posture suggested readiness to accommodate whatever preference his son might express. Despite his outward detachment from the ceremony itself, he remained attuned to Atreus' experience, prepared to support it according to the boy's needs rather than his own inclinations. "I think I'd like to follow for a little while," Atreus decided. "Not all the way to where the river meets the sea, but far enough to feel the distance developing gradually rather than all at once." Linde nodded approval. "A thoughtful choice. The remembering becomes different ritual depending on how we position ourselves relative to its unfolding. Come. There's a path that follows the river for some distance. We needn't hurry. The lanterns travel at their own pace, guided by currents deeper than what appears on the surface." As they prepared to follow the riverbank path, Linde approached Kratos with respectful acknowledgement. "You are welcome to join us, or to remain here as guardian of the launch point. Both roles hold significance within the ceremony." Kratos considered this invitation with characteristic economy of expression, weighing tactical considerations against his son's unspoken preferences. Though no obvious threats had manifested during their time by the river, habitual vigilance suggested maintaining defensive awareness rather than complete immersion in unfamiliar ritual. Yet he recognized Atreus' desire for his presence. the boy's developing confidence balanced against continued need for paternal protection and companionship. "I will accompany you," he decided, his deep voice rumbling softly in the quiet night. Not elaborating on his reasoning or expectations, merely stating intention in the direct manner that characterized his communication. They set forth along the narrow path that paralleled the Immerse winding course, Lind leading with Atreus close behind, Kratos maintaining slight distance that allowed both protective oversight and respect for his son's independent participation in the experience. The path itself seemed to glow faintly beneath their feet, not from artificial illumination but from some luminous quality inherent in the soil itself, as if the ground had absorbed light from countless previous ceremonies and now released it in subtle radiance that guided their steps without dispelling the surrounding darkness. "The Igra reshapes its banks with each season," Lindy explained as they walked, their voice blending harmoniously with the continuous sound of flowing water and the more ethereal melodies still emanating from the river spirits. What appears solid and unchanging from human perspective reveals itself as constantly transforming when observed across longer timescales. Shorelines shift, channels deepen or fill, islands emerge and disappear, all while the essential nature of the river remains continuous despite these changes. Atreus noted how this observation applied equally to their journey itself, apparently linear movement that contained endless variations within its forward progression. The river appeared differently from each new vantage point, revealing aspects invisible from previous positions while concealing others. Similarly, the floating lanterns created continuously evolving patterns as distance and perspective altered their apparent relationships to one another. "It's like watching stars," he remarked, observing how the glowing vessels created constellations that formed, dissolved, and reformed in endless variation. "They make patterns that change depending on where you stand, when you look, how you connect them in your mind." "An apt comparison," Mimir commented. "Both stars and memories appear fixed from certain perspectives, yet reveal their dynamic nature when observed with sufficient patience or from multiple vantage points. The ancients recognized this parallel, how celestial movements mirror internal processes, how macrocosm reflect microcosm at different scales." Their path occasionally diverged from the immediate riverbank, winding through stands of ancient trees whose massive trunks had clearly witnessed centuries of similar processions. In these sections, direct view of the water temporarily disappeared, though sounds of flowing current and melodic humming remained constant companions. Each reunion with the river after such separations revealed new configurations among the floating lanterns. Patterns dissolved and reconstituted during moments when direct observation paused. "This too carries significance within the ritual," Lind explained during one such reunion with the water's edge. "The remembering includes moments of direct witnessing, alternating with periods of trust, accepting that what we cannot currently see nevertheless continues unfolding according to patterns greater than our immediate perception." As they progressed downstream, the river gradually widened, its flow slowing as it spread across broader channel. Here, the lanterns drifted more languorously, creating denser constellations that lingered in gentle eddies or slow-moving pools before continuing their journey. The spirits accompanying these floating lights appeared more numerous as well, their watery forms occasionally rising several feet above the surface in ephemeral sculptures that collapsed back into flowing current after momentary manifestation. "We approached the gathering place," Linde identified, indicating wider section of riverbank ahead, where the path descended to meet a small pebbled beach. Here, the Igra slows deliberately, creating space where memories may commune before continuing toward the sea. Many find this location particularly significant within the ritual, a place where individual offerings reveal their connections to greater patterns. Upon reaching this wider section of shore, they paused to observe the extraordinary spectacle unfolding upon the water. Dozens of lanterns, not only those they had released, but apparently others from upstream participants, had congregated in the broader channel, creating complex, shifting mandalas of colored light. The reflection of these patterns in the dark water doubled their effect, creating impression of cosmic display stretching both above and below the river's surface. The spirits had grown more defined, more numerous, their movements now clearly purposeful rather than random. They arranged themselves around and between the floating lights in what appeared to be deliberate choreography, creating flowing geometric patterns that continuously transformed while maintaining harmonious relationship to the melodic vibrations still emanating from the river itself. "They're dancing," Atreus whispered, transfixed by the ethereal spectacle. "The convergence of memory and awareness," Linda confirmed softly. "Individual recollections joining collective remembering through movement and sound, neither losing its uniqueness nor remaining isolated. A communion that honors both particular and universal simultaneously." Even Kratos seemed momentarily captivated by this display, his habitual vigilance briefly yielding to genuine attention directed toward phenomenon outside tactical assessment. Something in the fluid grace of the spirit's movement perhaps recalled ancient observations of similar rituals from his distant past. Ceremonies witnessed but never participated in during youth, long since subsumed beneath centuries of warfare and divine manipulation. Atreus scanned the assembled lanterns, seeking the distinctive violet glow of his own contribution among dozens of similarly luminous vessels. He located it near the center of a particularly complex configuration, a spiral pattern where lights in varying shades of gold, blue, and violet rotated slowly around central point like planetary bodies orbiting invisible sun. "There," he said softly, pointing toward his floating lantern. "It's joined something larger." "As all authentic offerings do," Lindy affirmed. "The Egra recognizes connections between seemingly separate experiences, how joy and sorrow, accomplishment and loss, beginning and ending continuously flow into and through one another, creating patterns more significant than any isolated moment might suggest." As they watched from the pebbled shore, the spirit's dance intensified further, their movements becoming more elaborate while maintaining perfect synchronization with the river's melodic humming. Occasionally, individual spirits would approach specific lanterns, hovering momentarily, as if communing directly with the memories contained within, before rejoining the broader choreography. One particularly luminous spirit, larger than others, its watery form containing subtle hints of gold and green within predominant silver radiance, separated from the main gathering to approach shore, where Atreus stood observing. Though lacking distinct facial features, its general shape suggested feminine presence, an impression reinforced by graceful movement, reminiscent of dancers' deliberate poise. "She comes to acknowledge your offering personally," Lindy explained with evident surprise. "A rare honor. The Old Ones seldom interact directly with ceremony participants." The spirit paused at edge of shore, water flowing continuously through form that nevertheless maintained consistent shape despite this constant renewal of its substance. For several heartbeats it remained motionless, oriented toward Atreus, with what felt like expectant attention despite absence of recognizable sensory organs. "What should I do?" Atreus whispered, uncertain how to respond to this unexpected development. "Be present," Lindy advised simply. Acknowledge the acknowledgement. Following this guidance, Atreus stepped closer to water's edge, stopping where small wavelets occasionally lapped against the toes of his boots. He made no elaborate gesture, merely inclined his head slightly in respectful recognition of the spirit's attention. In response, the luminous entity extended what might be interpreted as arm or perhaps wing, a flowing appendage that briefly stretched toward Atreus without actually touching him. As this gesture completed, harmonic tones unlike previous melodies emanated from the spirit's form. Higher, clearer notes that somehow conveyed gratitude and recognition simultaneously. "She thanks you," Mimir translated softly from his position at Kratos' belt, not merely for the offering itself, but for the authenticity behind it. Genuine remembrance untainted by self-deception or strategic editing. The Vanir value truth in emotional expression above all else, particularly regarding memories of those who have transformed beyond physical existence. Before Atreus could respond, the spirit performed brief, graceful movement, something between bow and dance gesture, before turning to rejoin the larger congregation still engaged in elaborate choreography around the floating lanterns. Its departure left momentary vacancy in the air, as if something significant had briefly manifested, before returning to greater flow from which it had temporarily emerged. "An honor indeed," Linde repeated, their voice carrying unmistakable respect. The Old Ones witnessed Ygri's original sacrifice, remaining within the river when she transformed. They serve as memory keepers for the Vanir, preserving experiences that might otherwise fade from collective awareness across generations. This unexpected interaction seemed to mark natural conclusion to their downstream journey. The lanterns would continue toward distant sea, carrying memories beyond immediate observation, but the ceremonial witness had completed its essential purpose. What remained now was integration, rather than continued observation, allowing the experience to settle within consciousness rather than extending physical participation. "We should return," Lindy suggested gently. "The remembering continues without our presence, but its gift to us requires time for assimilation. Dreams tonight will likely carry echoes of what has been witnessed, weaving the experience more deeply into awareness than waking contemplation alone might accomplish." Their return journey unfolded in comfortable silence, retracing path along riverbank with occasional glimpses of distant, still visible lanterns continuing their downstream progress. The night had deepened considerably during their ceremonial participation, stars emerging in brilliant clarity through gaps in forest canopy overhead. Their illumination seemed somehow more vibrant than usual, as if the ritual's focus on inner light had heightened perception of external radiance as well. By the time they reached original launching point, the clearing had transformed through absence of human presence. Wildlife had reclaimed the space, not fearfully, but with apparent recognition of sacred territory, temporarily yielded to human purpose, now returning to more inclusive sharing. A fox paused briefly at forest edge, assessing newcomers with intelligent consideration before continuing its nocturnal business without alarm. Small amphibians croaked rhythmic greetings from reedy shoreline, while insects contributed their own melodic vibrations to night's complex symphony. "I'll participate in the remembering in their own ways," Lindy observed as they gathered minimal materials remaining from earlier preparations. "Each living being carries memories, experiences that shape identity and behavior. Though humans may construct more elaborate narratives around such recollections, the fundamental process extends throughout conscious existence." As they prepared to depart, Linde approached Atreus with formal but genuine gesture, hands pressed together briefly before opening like book to reveal small objects nestled in their palm. It appeared to be a miniature version of the lantern Atreus had created and released. Perfect replica rendered in material that resembled the original paper, but somehow more substantial, more permanent. A remembrance of your remembering, they explained, offering this token with ceremonial respect. Tradition provides these to first-time participants as tangible connection to intangible experience. You need not keep it forever. It serves its purpose merely by existing for whatever duration proves meaningful to you. Atreus accepted this gift with equal formality, recognizing significance beyond mere souvenir. The miniature lantern weighed almost nothing in his palm, yet carried impression of substance far exceeding its physical properties. Connection to experience that would continue developing within his awareness long after the actual ceremony had concluded. "Thank you," he said simply, tucking the token carefully into same pouch that had carried original materials. "For teaching me, for showing me this tradition." "Gratitude flows both ways," Linde responded with slight bow. "Each new participant brings fresh perspective to ancient practice, preventing ritual from becoming mere repetition without meaning. Your presence tonight contributed to the Igra's continuing awareness, as surely as the memory you offered to its waters." As the small group prepared for separate journeys, Linda presumably returning to nearby Vania settlement while Kratos and Atreus began their homeward trek, the river's melodic humming softened to barely perceptible background tone. The spirits had dispersed or submerged, their elaborate dance concluded for this particular gathering. Yet subtle luminescence remained across water's surface, not individual lights but general shimmer, suggesting continued presence beneath visible manifestation. "The remembering never truly ends," Lindy said in parting. "Like the river itself, it flows continuously, whether witnessed or unobserved. We dip momentarily into this current through ritual, but the current exists independent of our participation. Perhaps that's the most significant lesson, that memory transcends individual consciousness while simultaneously requiring it for expression." With these words offering closure to formal ceremony, they exchanged final farewells before separating, Linda following shoreline path that presumably led toward their home, while Kratos and Atreus began ascent toward forest trail that would eventually return them to familiar territory. Their journey back through the forest unfolded in peaceful silence, the sprites occasionally darting ahead to illuminate particularly uneven sections of the path before resuming their random dance among ancient tree trunks. Atreus walked close beside his father, not from childish fear of darkness, but from a desire for proximity that needed no verbal expression. "Did it help?" Kratos asked eventually, his deep voice surprisingly gentle in the night's quietude. Atreus considered the question carefully, understanding its layers. Had the ritual eased some portion of his grief? Had it fulfilled whatever purpose Faye might have intended in wanting him to experience this Vania tradition? "Yes," he replied finally, "not by making me forget, or even by making the sadness smaller, but by showing me that remembering doesn't have to mean being trapped in what's gone." He glanced up at his father's profile, stern yet somehow softened in the sprite's diffused illumination. "The memory isn't just mine anymore. It's part of something larger now. Like Mother is part of something larger, even if we can't see or touch her." Kratos offered no immediate response, yet his hand briefly found Atreus' shoulder, a gesture that conveyed more than words might have managed. They continued homeward through the ancient forest, accompanied by the dancing lights of curious sprites and the distant sound of the Egra's flowing waters carrying memories towards some unseen destination. Later that night, as Atreus drifted towards sleep in their cabin's familiar comfort, the gentle humming of the river spirits seemed to echo in his consciousness, not as memory exactly, but as continuing presence, a melodic undercurrent beneath ordinary awareness. In the space between wakefulness and dreams, he glimpsed again the pattern of lanterns flowing downstream, carrying moments of significance into a greater communion of light and water and remembrance. His chosen memory, that dawn moment shared with Faye, no longer felt sealed away in unreachable past, but somehow present, transformed yet continuing, like water itself, changing form while maintaining essential nature. As sleep embraced him more completely, Atreus carried this understanding into dreams, where rivers flowed between stars and lanterns guided travelers across the vast distances separating worlds. Morning arrived with gentle insistence, sunlight filtering through cabin windows to touch Atreus' face with warmth that gradually drew him from deep sleep. He woke with the lingering sense of having traveled great distances during the night, though his body had remained safely within familiar surroundings. Something had shifted within him, subtle yet significant, like the careful refolding of paper that transformed flat surface into vessel capable of carrying light. Kratos had already risen, his sleeping area empty, the cabin door slightly ajar to admit fresh air carrying scents of pine and distant water. Atreus joined his father outside, where Kratos stood with characteristic stillness, gaze directed eastward toward mountains partially obscured by morning mist. "Did you dream?" Atreus asked, the question emerging without conscious intention. Kratos glanced down at his son, expression unreadable yet somehow less guarded than usual. "Yes," he answered simply, offering no details yet not dismissing the inquiry outright. They stood together in comfortable silence, morning light strengthening around them, forest creatures resuming daily patterns of movement and sound. The peace of the previous evening's ritual seemed to have followed them home, not erasing the challenges that awaited, but perhaps providing different perspective from which to approach them. Later, as they prepared for the day's necessary tasks, Atreus removed the miniature lantern from his pouch, studying its delicate construction with renewed appreciation. Though physically tiny, it seemed to contain expansiveness beyond its dimensions, connection to experience that continued unfolding within consciousness long after the actual event had concluded. He placed this token carefully on the small shelf where he kept personal treasures, items collected during their journeys that held particular significance. Beside the carved wooden animals Faye had made for him as a child, the miniature lantern caught morning light in a way that briefly illuminated surrounding objects, casting gentle shadows that seemed to pulse with subtle rhythm, reminiscent of flowing water. "Mother knew," he said quietly, more to himself than to either Kratos or Mimir. "She knew I would need to learn how to remember differently." Outside their cabin, sunlight strengthened across the forest canopy, illuminating autumn's gradual transformation of green to gold and crimson. The world continued its eternal cycles of change and renewal, while memories, carried by lanterns, by rivers, by hearts that learned to honor without clinging, flowed onward, joining greater currents that connected all moments across the vast distances of time and space and understanding. In the quiet morning light, Atreus felt Faye's presence, not as ghost or illusion, but as continuing influence, transformed yet persistent, like river changing course while maintaining essential nature. The lantern ritual had not diminished his awareness of her absence, but had somehow altered its quality. Less jagged emptiness, more flowing acknowledgement of what remained despite physical separation. "Ready yourself," Kratos instructed, interrupting these contemplations with practical focus characteristic of their daily routine. "We hunt today, the winter approaches, and our stores require replenishing." Atreus nodded, gathering his bow and quiver with practiced efficiency. Life continued its forward movement, with necessary tasks demanding attention regardless of philosophical insights or emotional transformations. Yet something had changed in how he carried yesterday within today, a subtle shift in relationship between memory and present moment, between what had been lost and what continued. As they departed their cabin for the day's hunting expedition, Atreus glanced back at the small structure that had been home throughout his childhood. Sunlight illuminated its wooden walls with golden radiance reminiscent of lanterns floating on dark water. For a brief moment, he imagined Faye standing in the doorway, as she had countless times during his earlier years, watching him depart while remaining center point to which he would inevitably return. The image dissolved as quickly as it had formed, yet without the painful contraction that typically accompanied such recollections. Instead, he felt curious lightness, acknowledgement that memory need not become burdened when carried properly, when allowed to flow rather than solidify into grief that resisted natural transformation. "I'm ready," he said, turning to follow his father into the forest. Ready not merely for day's practical challenges, but for continuing journey of becoming, process that incorporated past experience without being limited by it, that honored what had been while remaining open to what might yet emerge. The river Igra continued its flow beyond their direct perception, carrying lanterns and memories toward distant horizon where water met sky in continuous exchange that transcended ordinary boundaries. Similarly, Atreus carried his experience of the remembering forward into each new day, not as completed event, but as continuing process, teaching him how past and present might flow together rather than opposing one another in painful contradiction. In this flowing awareness, he recognized Faye's final and perhaps most significant gift, not merely protection during his vulnerable early years or preparation for challenges that awaited, but modeling of relationship with time itself that allowed full participation in present moment without denying what had come before or anxiously anticipating what might follow. The lantern's light continued burning within him, gentle illumination that transformed memory from weight into wing, from boundary into horizon, from ending into cyclical return, that honored impermanence without surrendering to despair. This understanding accompanied Atreus and Kratos as they moved deeper into the forest, their footsteps leaving temporary impressions that would gradually disappear, yet contribute to continuing story written across landscape, both external and internal, narrative of lives interwoven with greater patterns that transcended individual experience, while simultaneously depending upon it for expression. As the memory of the lanterns flowing down the river Egra settled into Atreus's consciousness, becoming part of the tapestry of experiences that shaped his understanding of the world, new wonders awaited father and son on their continuing journey through the 9 realms. Just as the river had carried their memories toward distant horizons, the paths of fate would soon lead them toward the night skies, where ancient cosmic forces wove patterns of light that connected the realms in ways few mortals ever witnessed. The wisdom Atreus had gained at the river Igra, learning to honor the past without being imprisoned by it, would serve him well in the challenges ahead. For as the seasons turned and the constellations shifted their eternal dance overhead, Kratos and Atreus would find themselves drawn to another place of power and mystery, where the boundaries between earth and sky grew thin enough to touch. As one journey of understanding concluded, another began beneath the watchful gaze of stars older than the gods themselves. As twilight descended across Vanaheim, Atreus found himself alone at the edge of their small camp. The day's hunt had been successful, and Kratos now slept deeply beside the dying embers of their fire, his massive frame rising and falling with each slow breath. Mimir, too, had drifted into whatever passed for slumber in his unique existence, his wooden features relaxed in rare tranquility. The severed head rarely allowed himself such vulnerability, but the serenity of this particular valley seemed to have eased even his perpetual vigilance. Atreus could not explain the restlessness that kept sleep at bay. Perhaps it was the unusual clarity of the night sky, unveiled by a break in Vanaheim's typically dense forest canopy. Perhaps it was the whispers he had been hearing since midday, not threatening or alarming, but persistent, like distant wind chimes carried on a breeze too gentle to feel. They reminded him of the stories his mother used to tell on winter nights, when the darkness pressed close against their cabin walls, and the wind spoke in voices almost, but not quite, human. He glanced once more at his father before making his decision. Kratos had been pushing himself hard these past days, even by his formidable standards. Their journey through Vanaheim had presented unexpected challenges, not the typical dangers of Draugr or trolls, but rather geographical puzzles that required constant navigation and renegotiation. The strain showed even in the god of war's iron constitution, manifesting as deeper lines around his eyes, and a slight heaviness in movements normally fluid despite their power. He would not wake until dawn. The boy retrieved his bow, never left behind, even for a short excursion, and checked the hunting knife secured at his hip. The weapon had been a gift from Brock, its blade etched with runes that glowed faintly in darkness. Though not as impressive as his father's axe, the knife had served him well in situations where silence mattered more than force. With practiced quiet, Atreus slipped away from the campsite, following the subtle call that had been teasing the edges of his consciousness throughout the afternoon and evening. The path led upward, winding through groves of silver-barked trees whose leaves shimmered with faint luminescence. Their trunks rose straight and true, unmarred by the twisted deformities that characterized much of Vanaheim's flora. The silver bark seemed to absorb moonlight and reflect it back with gentle enhancement, creating natural illumination that made torch or fire unnecessary. Unlike the more dangerous regions of Vanaheim, this hillside seemed remarkably peaceful. No Draugr lurked between ancient trunks, no poisonous flora threatened unwary travelers. Even the night birds sang softly, rather than issuing their usual territorial warnings. Mother once told me about places like this, Atreus whispered to himself, recalling conversations from what now seemed another lifetime. Pockets where the realm remembers its original nature, before the wars between Vanir and Aesir. According to Faye's stories, such locations retain something of the primordial harmony that had once characterized Vanaheim in its entirety. A glimpse of what might have been, had history followed a different course. The Vanir, she had explained, understood growth and renewal in ways the Aesir never could, their magic rooted in cycles of nature rather than dominion over it. As he climbed higher, the forest thinned, giving way to gentle meadows carpeted with flowers that should not have bloomed at night. Their petals opened toward the stars rather than the sun, collecting dew that glowed with subtle iridescence. Each blossom appeared distinct from its neighbors, some with spiral patterns reminiscent of galaxies, others with straight lines like constellations, still others with complex geometries that seemed to shift when viewed from different angles. The air grew noticeably lighter, fresher, as if each breath contained some essential nourishment beyond mere oxygen. The whispers grew more distinct as well, resolving into delicate melodies without words, or perhaps with words, in a language too ancient or ethereal for conventional understanding. They seemed to originate from somewhere above, drawing him ever upward with their haunting beauty. Occasionally, Atreus caught fragments that resonated with meaning, impressions of welcome, of anticipation, of recognition, though no clear statements emerged from the musical flow. Small creatures watched his passage from the safety of flowering bushes, not the usual rabbits or foxes, but beings that resembled them while clearly belonging to a different order of existence. Their eyes reflected starlight with unusual intensity, and their movements possessed a deliberate grace that suggested intelligence beyond animal instinct. None approached or fled. They simply observed with calm curiosity as Atreus continued his ascent. The hillside grew steeper, requiring more deliberate navigation. Atreus found himself using skills developed during their extensive travels, testing footholds before committing his weight, using saplings for balance without damaging them, reading the terrain for the path of least resistance. The climbing challenged without threatening, each obstacle overcome providing subtle satisfaction rather than relief from danger. When Atreus reached the hill's summit, he stopped abruptly, breath catching in his throat. Before him lay a glade unlike any he had previously encountered in their extensive travels. The ground formed a perfect circle, perhaps 50 paces across, rimmed with stones that appeared to have grown naturally from the earth, rather than being placed by conscious design. Each stone bore subtle patterns that corresponded to particular stars visible in the night sky above, creating a terrestrial reflection of celestial arrangements. At the glade's center floated what could only be described as a nest, though no bird that had ever lived could have constructed such a wonder. The structure hovered several feet above the ground, gently rotating like a planet around an invisible sun. Woven from threads of what appeared to be solidified moonlight, it formed a dome, perhaps twice Atreus's height, with intricate patterns that shifted and flowed as if responding to unseen currents. These patterns occasionally resolved into recognizable forms, trees, animals, human figures, before dissolving back into abstract configurations that nonetheless conveyed meaning beyond specific imagery. Scattered throughout these silvery strands were motes of light that pulsed with soft radiance, creating an effect reminiscent of stars viewed through a diaphanous cloud. The Starweaver's Nest, Atreus breathed, the name arising from his memory of one of Faye's more obscure tales, a legend she had shared on a winter night when sleep eluded him much as it did now. According to the story, the nest existed at the boundary between wakefulness and dreams, a place where the substance of slumber was crafted before being distributed to mortal minds across the realms. Faye had spoken of it as metaphor rather than literal place, a way of understanding how consciousness and unconsciousness interrelated rather than a physical location one might visit. Yet here it stood before him, exactly as she had described in her gentle, teaching voice. For a long while he simply stood at the glade's edge, mesmerized by the nest's gentle rotation and the harmonious tones that emanated from its crystalline structure. There seemed to be no danger here, no sense of threat or malevolence, only a profound serenity that gradually eased the restlessness that had driven him from camp. The music flowing from the structure organized itself around themes that evolved and returned, like conversations between ancient friends, complex but never chaotic, novel but somehow deeply familiar. The night air caressed his skin with perfect temperature, neither warm nor cool but precisely balanced between extremes. Even gravity seemed gentler here, each movement requiring less effort than normal, as if his body had shed some fraction of its usual physical constraints. Breathing deepened naturally, his lungs finding rhythm with the nest's rotation and the melodic patterns flowing from it. Eventually, curiosity overcame caution. Atreus stepped into the glade, half expecting some barrier to repel him or alarm to sound. Instead, the melodic whispers intensified slightly, as if acknowledging his presence, with something approaching welcome. The grass beneath his feet felt unusually springy, each blade perfect in its formation, untouched by blight or decay. Where his steps fell, subtle luminescence bloomed momentarily before fading back to normal coloration, creating a temporary trail that marked his passage. The rimming stones seemed to observe his progress with benevolent attention, their crystalline structures catching and refracting starlight in patterns that shifted as he passed each one. Though they possessed no obvious sensory organs, Atreus distinctly perceived, as if ancient awareness resided within the mineral formations. Not consciousness as he understood it, but some fundamental capacity for recognition that preceded the division between animate and inanimate existence. As he approached the hovering nest, details became clearer. What had appeared from a distance as simple threads revealed themselves as intricate lattices of interconnected filaments, each containing patterns reminiscent of written language, though not one Atreus recognized despite his facility with numerous tongues. These markings flowed like water, occasionally merging to form larger symbols before separating again into their component elements. The motes of light moved purposefully along these threads, occasionally gathering in clusters before dispersing again in choreographed sequence. The rotation revealed different aspects of the structure as Atreus circled it slowly. From some angles, the dome appeared nearly transparent, offering glimpses of swirling colors within. From others, it seemed solid and opaque, its surface reflecting starlight with mirror-like precision. The variance depended not only on position but on some quality of attention. Different ways of seeing yielded different manifestations, as if the nest existed simultaneously in multiple states, until observation temporarily resolved it into particular form. When he stood directly beneath the structure, Atreus noticed something he had not observed from afar. An opening at the nest's base, roughly circular and just large enough to admit a person of his size. Unlike the rest of the structure, this aperture remained constant regardless of viewing angle, a fixed point in the otherwise fluid architecture. Whether this entrance existed by design or coincidence remained unclear, but its presence suggested at least the possibility of further exploration. "Father would tell me to be cautious," he murmured, assessing potential risks. Yet nothing about this place triggered his well-honed warning instincts. If anything, he felt an unusual sense of security, as if the nest itself offered protection rather than peril. The dangers they typically encountered, hostile creatures, malevolent spirits, traps set by suspicious gods, seemed inconceivable in this harmonious environment where every element existed in perfect relation to every other. Still, prudence suggested a graduated approach. Atreus extended his hand slowly toward the nearest portion of the structure, prepared to withdraw at the first sign of adverse reaction. When his fingers made contact with the silvery threads, he experienced not temperature or texture in ordinary sense, but rather a gentle vibration that traveled up his arm and resonated briefly in his chest before dissipating. The sensation carried no discomfort, only brief connection to the energy animating the peculiar architecture. Decision made, Atreus set his bow carefully on the ground, still within reach should need arise, but a gesture of respect toward this clearly sacred space. Then, with measured movements, he stepped directly beneath the opening and found himself gently lifted upward as if carried by an invisible current. The bow rose alongside him, maintaining its relative position rather than remaining on the ground as expected. The sensation was not alarming, but rather like floating in perfectly temperate water, supported from all sides by gentle pressure that guided rather than constrained. No physical mechanism explained the levitation, no wind or obvious magical energy. Yet the movement continued with smooth inevitability. In moments, he had passed through the circular entrance and entered the interior of the Starweaver's nest, his bow accompanying him as if acknowledging its status as extension of himself rather than separate object. Inside, the structure appeared vastly larger than its external dimensions suggested, a phenomenon Atreus had encountered before in certain magical spaces. The dome soared above him, its inner surface alive with constellations that did not match any night sky he had ever studied. These star patterns moved in slow rotation, occasionally forming connections between previously separate clusters, creating ephemeral images that told stories without words. Between these stellar arrangements flowed rivers of luminescent threads, constantly rearranging themselves into new configurations. The floor beneath his feet consisted of what appeared to be cloud stuff, solid enough to support his weight, yet yielding like the finest down bedding. It undulated subtly with the nest's rotation, creating a gentle rocking motion reminiscent of a cradle. With each step, the surface responded to his presence, firming where support was needed, softening where comfort took precedence over structure. His bow settled beside him, resting securely despite the unusual surface. Most remarkable, however, were the floating orbs that drifted throughout the space. Hundreds of them, varying in size from a walnut to a melon, each containing swirling patterns of color and light. They moved with apparent intelligence, occasionally merging briefly before separating again, exchanging portions of their luminous contents in the process. Their movements formed complex choreography that somehow avoided collisions despite constant motion within limited space. The larger spheres generally maintained higher positions, while smaller ones circulated at lower elevations, though exceptions to this pattern occurred with sufficient frequency to suggest choice rather than fixed hierarchy. "Dreams," Aorus whispered, understanding flowing into him as naturally as breath. These orbs contained dreams in various stages of formation, some barely conceived wisps of potential, others elaborate narratives nearly ready for delivery to their sleeping recipients. Each represented unique combination of elements: memory and imagination, fear and desire, recent experience and ancient knowledge, woven together to serve purposes ranging from simple rest to profound revelation. As this realization crystallized, one of the smaller orbs detached itself from a passing cluster and drifted toward him. It hovered at eye level, pulsing gently as if inviting attention. Its surface displayed predominantly blue and green hues, swirling in patterns reminiscent of ocean currents viewed from great height. Tentatively, Atreus extended his hand, stopping just short of contact, uncertain whether interaction would disrupt whatever process the orb currently underwent. "May I?" he asked softly, unsure if permission was required, or even if any entity existed to grant it. His words emerged as visible breath, despite comfortable temperature, each syllable briefly illuminated before dissipating into the surrounding atmosphere. In response, the orb descended to rest in his palm. It weighed nothing, yet felt substantive, like holding a bubble that refused to burst. Though no obvious membrane contained it, the sphere maintained perfect form regardless of how he moved his hand. Within its translucent surface, colors shifted and flowed, gradually resolving into recognizable imagery. A child running through summer meadows, chasing butterflies whose wings contained galaxies. The scene conveyed such pure joy that Atreus found himself smiling in unconscious response. "A child's dream," he murmured, somehow knowing this vision was destined for a young girl in a distant village, her first peaceful sleep after recovering from long illness. The knowledge came without explanation, simply present in his mind as if it had always belonged there. He could see her face, though he had never met her. Round cheeks still thin from recent fever, dark hair spread across simple pillows, small hands relaxed in healing slumber. The dream contained more than mere imagery. As Atreus held the orb, he perceived emotional currents flowing beneath its visual surface. Relief replacing prolonged anxiety, freedom displacing confinement, possibility returning after confrontation with limitation. These elements intertwined with sensory impressions, the scent of wildflowers, the warmth of sunlight, the tickle of grass against bare feet, creating holistic experience rather than mere mental picture. The orb lingered in his hand for several more heartbeats before gently rising and rejoining its companions. As it departed, another approached, this one larger and swirling with deeper hues of amber and bronze. When Atreus received it, the imagery within depicted an elderly craftsman completing a masterwork begun decades earlier, finishing the final details with hands made strong and steady despite their actual arthritis. The emotional resonance of accomplishment and legacy fulfilled brought unexpected moisture to the boy's eyes. This pattern continued, different dreams approaching for brief sharing before returning to their original paths. Each seemed drawn to him by some quality of affinity, as if his presence created gentle magnetism that temporarily diverted their courses without disrupting their essential journeys. No compulsion drove these interactions. The orbs approached with what felt like curiosity or offering, rather than obligation. One by one, dreams approached him, each sharing its essence before moving on. A scholar discovering long-sought knowledge in ancient texts, the parchment seeming to illuminate from within as crucial connections formed between previously separate ideas. A farmer watching rain end a devastating drought, soil darkening with life-giving moisture, while crops visibly strengthened before his wondering eyes. A mother finding her lost child safe and unharmed. The terror of separation dissolving into relief so profound, it transformed her perception of ordinary existence. A warrior laying down arms to embrace a former enemy, finding greater strength in reconciliation than had ever been possible through combat. Some dreams were mundane, finding a missing object, enjoying a favored meal, conversation with a friend long absent. Others soared with impossible fantasy, flight through painted skies where colors had texture and sound, exploration of underwater kingdoms where breathing posed no difficulty and pressure created pleasure rather than danger, communication with creatures that had never existed outside imagination, yet conveyed wisdom unavailable from actual sources. All possessed the peculiar logic of dreamscapes, where inconsistencies went unquestioned, and limitations dissolved without explanation or justification. After witnessing perhaps 24 such visions, Atreus noticed a pattern forming in the nest around him. The drifting orbs had begun arranging themselves in concentric circles, rotating in alternating directions like the mechanisms of some cosmic timepiece. Smaller dreams occupied inner rings, while larger ones formed outer circles, creating stratified arrangement that nonetheless maintained continuous exchange between layers. At the center of this formation, directly above where he stood, a disturbance appeared in the fabric of the dome. A gentle swirling of threads that gradually coalesced into a column of soft light extending downward. This illumination possessed a quality different from the dreams or the nest's structure, a sense of presence rather than mere phenomenon. Though it formed no recognizable shape, Atreus felt certainty that he was in the company of something conscious, attentive, and immeasurably ancient. The light pulsed with rhythms that suggested respiration despite having no physical lungs, creating impression of living entity operating according to principles beyond conventional biology. The Star Weaver, he breathed, the name coming unbidden to his lips. The words emerged with conviction despite lack of confirming evidence. Knowledge arising from some deeper source than rational deduction or remembered description. The light pulsed once in what felt like acknowledgement. Though no words were spoken, understanding blossomed in Atreus' mind. Not imposed, but offered. Like knowledge recalled rather than newly acquired. Images and concepts flowed into his consciousness, forming coherent communication without requiring translation into specific language. The Star Weaver had existed since the earliest days of creation, neither god nor giant, but something outside conventional categorization. It preceded the artificial boundaries between divine hierarchies, operating according to principles established when consciousness first differentiated from primordial chaos. It gathered the substance of dreams from thoughts, hopes, fears, and memories that filtered upward from the sleeping realms, weaving them into experiences that would bring necessary insight, comfort, warning, or simple rest to their recipient. This work continued without interruption, regardless of the conflicts that raged between pantheons or the rise and fall of civilizations. The Star Weaver remained neutral in these struggles, concerned only with maintaining the essential rhythm of consciousness and unconsciousness that sustained mortal existence. Gods might claim authority over sleep or dreams, Hypnot among Norse, but such jurisdiction represented political convenience rather than fundamental truth. The Weaver acknowledged these figures without submitting to their authority, maintaining independence that predated their very conception. Visitors to the nest were rare but not unprecedented. Those who found their way here were invariably drawn by some significant junction in their life's path. A moment when the guidance of dreams might prove particularly valuable. Some came in physical form as Atreus had, others arrived through dream walking, their sleeping minds temporarily liberated from bodily constraint. All received what they genuinely needed, though this rarely matched initial expectations or conscious desires. As this understanding settled within him, Atreus felt a question forming. Not spoken, but nonetheless clear. Would he choose to observe the Weaver's work, or participate in it? The invitation carried no pressure, only possibility. He could remain a witness to this ancient process, or he could contribute to it in some small way, adding his own thread to the vast tapestry being continuously created. Atreus considered the options carefully. Observation offered safety and continued learning without risk of interference. Participation, however, suggested opportunity to affect others, perhaps positively, though his limited understanding created potential for unintended consequences. The responsible choice might be continued passive reception until greater comprehension developed. Yet something deeper than rational assessment guided his decision. An intuitive recognition that participation itself might yield understanding unavailable through mere observation. His mother had often emphasized this principle during his education, insisting that certain knowledge emerged only through engaged practice rather than theoretical study. "I would like to help," Atreus said quietly, "if I am permitted." His voice carried unusual resonance within the nest's interior, each word creating subtle ripples through the cloud floor beneath his feet. The column of light brightened momentarily before extending a tendril toward him. The luminous appendage moved with deliberate grace, conveying neither threat nor urgency, but simply purposeful connection. Where it touched his forehead, Atreus felt warmth spread through his consciousness, not invasive but gently instructive. showing, rather than telling, how dream stuff could be gathered and shaped. The knowledge unfolded in layers, first principles governing dream substance itself, then techniques for handling this delicate material, finally guidelines for creating balanced experiences tailored to specific needs. Atreus learned that dreams required particular equilibrium between structure and fluidity, between familiar elements and novel possibilities, between comfort and challenge. Too much safety created stagnation. Too much innovation produced incoherence. Effective dreams operated at the boundary between known and unknown, facilitating necessary transitions rather than reinforcing existing patterns or imposing arbitrary disruptions. Understanding the process now, he closed his eyes and extended his awareness outward. His thoughts brushed against the raw material of dreams, emotions, images, fragments of memory that flowed like currents through the nest. This substance possessed unusual characteristics, simultaneously solid enough to hold shape, yet fluid enough to adapt continuously. Influenced by intention without being fully controlled by it. With careful concentration, he gathered a small portion of this essence, cradling it in his mind as it began taking form. The substance responded to his intention, though not always precisely as expected. Atreus found that dreaming required a delicate balance between direction and allowance. Too much control resulted in rigid, lifeless constructs, while too little produced shapeless chaos. The ideal approach involved suggesting a starting point, then permitting the dream's natural tendencies to unfold with gentle guidance rather than domination. Like archery, the process required both deliberate aim and recognition that once released, the arrow would follow its own path, modified by wind and gravity. His first attempt produced a simple vision of forest exploration, infused with the wonder he himself had experienced when first learning to track game under Faye's tutelage. He included sensory details that had particularly impressed him. The varied textures of bark beneath curious fingers, the subtle distinctions between animal movements revealed in disturbed undergrowth, the satisfied exhaustion following days spent in active learning. The completed dream resembled a small golden orb, less sophisticated than those crafted by the Star Weaver, but viable nonetheless. The column of light extended another tendril, which lifted the newly created dream from Atreus's palm and carried it into the rotating constellation of orbs. There it found a place among its companions, its golden surface occasionally brushing against neighboring dreams in greeting or exchange. Though modestly sized and simple in structure, the orb pulsed with genuine vitality, its essence containing authentic experience rather than artificial construction. This authenticity, Atreus somehow knew, would compensate for whatever technical limitations characterized his initial creation. Encouraged, Atreus attempted a second dream, this one inspired by his memories of storytelling beside evening fires. He recalled the particular comfort of those moments, fatigue from day's work creating pleasant heaviness, while Faye's voice painted images more vivid than physical sight could capture. The resulting orb gleamed with amber warmth, containing narratives that would branch and adapt according to the dreamer's own responses, rather than following fixed storyline, regardless of individual preference. His third creation emerged from more complex emotional territory, the bittersweet recognition of growth that requires leaving certain comforts behind. This theme had dominated his recent experiences with Kratos, as their journey necessitated abandonment of familiar patterns while revealing previously undiscovered strengths. The dream materialized as a sphere of shifting blue-green hues, similar to the ocean's surface viewed from below, light penetrating to different depths, creating bands of varied illumination. Within this atmospheric environment, the dream contained symbolic representations of transition, doors opening to unexpected vistas, familiar objects transformed through new perspective, limitations revealed as temporary boundaries rather than permanent constraints. With each attempt, Atreus gained confidence and subtlety. The initial tentative experiments gave way to more nuanced creations, incorporating multiple layers of meaning and experience. The Star Weaver offered occasional corrections through gentle pulses of guidance, showing how to balance elements or resolve contradictions that might disturb a sleeper's rest. These adjustments never undermined Atreus's essential vision, but rather enhanced its effectiveness through technical refinements beyond his current skill level. The process became meditative, focusing his attention so completely that time ceased to hold meaning. Each dream required full presence, engaging not only creativity, but empathy, the ability to imagine how particular combinations of image, emotion, and narrative might affect someone unlike himself. This exercise in perspective-taking came naturally to Atreus, who had always possessed unusual sensitivity to others' experiences, despite his limited social exposure. After completing what might have been his 7th or 8th dream, he had lost precise count. Atreus noticed a new orb approaching him. Unlike those he had previously encountered or created, this one shimmered with a silvery iridescence that somehow suggested greater significance. Its surface displayed unusual stability compared to the constant flux characterizing most dreams, indicating either completed development or exceptional internal coherence. When it settled into his waiting hands, the imagery within resolved into a scene both familiar and strange. Himself and Kratos, standing before a doorway formed of intertwined roots and stone, preparing to step through into brilliant light. Though the perspective came from behind them, preventing view of their faces, their postures conveyed profound determination tinged with solemnity, as if they approached a moment of irrevocable decision. Their hands were joined, a connection rarely manifested in waking life, but powerfully symbolic within the dream's context. The emotional resonance of the dream scene carried complex harmonies, resolution following extended conflict, acceptance of necessary sacrifice, hope transcending present difficulty. Most notably, it conveyed a sense of shared purpose between father and son, their individual strengths aligned toward common cause, despite the considerable differences in their natures. The scene suggested culmination, not ending but transformation, completion of one phase creating foundation for the next. "Is this?" Atreus began, then hesitated, unsure how to frame his question. His thoughts fluctuated between several possibilities. Was this prophecy? Memory from another timeline? Symbolic representation of psychological truth? Manifestation of his own unacknowledged hopes regarding their relationship's development? The Star Weaver's light pulsed with what felt like gentle negation. This was not prophecy in the conventional sense, but rather one possible configuration of future events. A path that might manifest depending on countless choices yet unmade. Dreams sometimes reflected such potentialities, particularly when their recipients stood at crucial junctions, where small decisions could create significant divergences. Unlike deliberate divination, which attempted to fix future outcomes through knowledge of them, dream glimpses honored the fundamental uncertainty necessary for genuine choice. Understanding this distinction brought both relief and renewed uncertainty. The future remained unwritten, yet patterns existed that dreams might occasionally reveal, not as fixed destinations, but as landmarks on maps containing many possible routes. Potential existed for the relationship depicted in the Silver Dream, but actualizing it would require continued effort and openness from both participants. No guarantee accompanied the vision, only possibility. The silver orb lingered in his hands a moment longer before rising to join a special constellation near the dome's apex. A collection of particularly luminous dreams that pulsed in synchronized rhythm. These, Atreus somehow knew, were destined for dreamers, whose choices carried unusual consequence for the broader tapestry of existence. Not necessarily kings or generals in conventional hierarchy, but individuals whose decisions would influence numerous others through complex chains of causation, often invisible to ordinary perception. As the orb settled into its place, a subtle shift occurred throughout the nest. The rotating patterns of light slowed perceptibly, and the ambient melodies deepened toward the lower registers of their range. The concentric circles of dreams began gradual migration toward the dome's perimeter, maintaining their organizational structure while preparing for some transition. The column of light representing the Star Weaver's presence contracted slightly, its brilliance dimming to a softer glow. Atreus recognized the signals of a transition beginning, night progressing toward its final hours, the time when dreams completed their journeys to waking minds. Soon the newly crafted visions would depart the nest, traveling along invisible pathways to their designated recipients. This distribution had occurred continuously throughout his visit, but now intensified as the primary purpose of the night's gathering approached fulfillment. The Star Weaver's light pulsed once more with gentle communication. Atreus had been welcome, his contribution valued, but the cycle now approached its culmination. Like the dreams themselves, he too would soon need to return to his proper place. This departure represented not rejection, but appropriate conclusion, his participation complete for this particular gathering, though the experience might inform future interactions with the dream realm. "I understand," he said softly, feeling neither disappointment nor regret, only appropriate conclusion. "Thank you for showing me this." The gratitude flowed from genuine appreciation rather than mere politeness, recognition of rare privilege, extended without obligation. In response, the light extended a final tendril, touching not his forehead this time, but the center of his chest. Warmth blossomed beneath his ribs, spreading outward in gentle waves that reached his fingertips and toes before settling into steady glow centered at his heart. This was neither instruction nor communication, but gift, a small portion of dream essence that would remain with him after departure, allowing occasional conscious access to the understanding he had gained within the nest. This essence would not grant supernatural powers or extraordinary abilities, but rather enhance natural capacities already present, deepening intuition, facilitating connection between conscious and unconscious knowledge, occasionally revealing patterns normally hidden by waking perception's necessary selectivity. Like a key that opens particular doors, the gift would provide access to insights typically available only during sleep, though using this access would require discernment and appropriate timing. As this exchange completed, the cloud floor beneath Atreus began to lower him gently toward the opening through which he had entered. His bow rose alongside him, maintaining its position relative to his body without requiring conscious attention. The descent felt like floating on an autumn leaf, spiraling toward Earth. Unhurried, graceful, following natural pattern rather than abrupt transition. As he passed through the circular opening, Atreus caught final glimpses of the nest's interior, the concentric circles of dreams preparing for dispersal, the constellations shifting into farewell configurations, the silver threads weaving new patterns that would shape the coming days' unconscious journeys. These images remained vivid in his mind, even as physical perception transitioned from the nest's extraordinary environment to the more familiar context of the night-clad glade. When his feet touched the grass once more, Atreus found the night significantly advanced. Stars shifted in their courses to indicate several hours had passed. The nest continued its gentle rotation overhead, though its brilliance had softened to match the pre-dawn dimness beginning to suffuse the eastern sky. Its exterior appeared simpler now, as if the most complex aspects of its structure had turned inward during the night's progression, preparing for the day's dormancy, when dream work would continue at reduced intensity. The glade itself had undergone subtle transformation during his absence. Dew gathered on every surface, each droplet containing miniature reflection of the stars above. The rimming stones glowed with gentle phosphorescence that outlined their complex crystalline structures. Small night-blooming flowers had fully opened, their petals radiating patterns that matched certain constellations visible overhead, creating correspondence between terrestrial and celestial geometries. He retrieved his bow from where it lay, exactly as placed upon his arrival. The weapon felt both familiar and somehow new against his palm, as if his perception of even this most common companion had been subtly altered by his experience within the nest. Its wooden surface seemed more obviously alive now, not merely shaped material, but continuation of the tree's essential nature, transformed into new purpose. The string vibrated faintly against his fingers, responding to currents in the air too subtle for ordinary detection. With one final glance upward at the shimmering structure, Atreus began his descent toward camp. The path seemed to generate itself beneath his feet, requiring no conscious navigation despite the darkness. Each step felt perfectly placed, his balance never threatening to falter, even on the steepest portions of the hillside. Stones that might have turned underfoot remained stable. Roots that might have tripped him seemed to soften momentarily upon contact, before returning to normal firmness. This unusual sure-footedness, he realized, resulted from the dream essence gifted by the Star Weaver, a subtle enhancement of his connection to the natural world, temporarily aligning his movements with optimal patterns already existing within the landscape. Not magic in the conventional sense, but a deeper attunement to possibilities, present but typically unrecognized. The gift didn't eliminate physical constraints, but rather revealed most efficient navigation within their boundaries. The silver-barked trees appeared different during his descent, their luminous properties more pronounced than during his upward journey. What had seemed simple reflected moonlight now revealed complex patterns flowing through trunks and branches, currents of energy that responded to his passing with subtle intensification. These patterns resembled the weaving threads of the nest itself, suggesting fundamental connection between apparently separate phenomena. As he walked, Atreus found his thoughts drifting toward the dreams he had witnessed and created. Their beauty and purpose seemed more significant now than the conflicts and quests that typically occupied his waking attention. Though he recognized the necessity of their current journey, he wondered if its ultimate meaning might differ from their initial understanding. Less about specific destinations or accomplishments, and more about transformations occurring within themselves along the way. This perspective shift didn't diminish the importance of their tasks, but rather contextualized them within broader patterns. Perhaps scattering Faye's ashes represented not merely fulfillment of her final request, but catalyst for developments she had foreseen without directly articulating. The challenges they encountered might serve purposes beyond obvious obstacles to overcome, opportunities for growth that couldn't occur under less demanding circumstances. The forest around him had changed as well, or perhaps merely his perception of it. Trees that had seemed ordinary during his ascent now revealed subtle patterns in bark and branch that suggested deliberate growth toward ideal form. Night creatures moved with purpose rather than randomness, their activities forming complementary layers of interaction rather than mere survival behaviors. Even the air itself appeared threaded with currents normally invisible, carrying information and energy between seemingly separate elements of the ecosystem. By the time the camp came into view, faint light had begun filtering through the eastern trees. Kratos remained asleep beside the fire's now cold ashes, his massive form betraying no awareness of his son's absence. Mimir, too, continued his wooden slumber, features peaceful in the growing dawn. Neither showed signs of disturbance or concern, suggesting Atreus' absence had gone completely unnoticed, a fortunate circumstance that eliminated need for explanation that might have proven difficult to articulate. Atreus settled quietly onto his bedroll, laying his bow within easy reach as habit demanded. Though he had been awake throughout the night, he felt neither exhaustion nor the discomfort typically associated with missed sleep. Instead, a profound tranquility permeated his awareness, as if he had experienced rest of a different but equally restorous nature. His body remained fresh, energized by the dream essence still circulating through. Closing his eyes, he discovered his thoughts assuming the fluid quality of dreams despite his waking state. Images and impressions flowing in natural sequence without the rigid structure of ordinary consciousness. This pleasant liminality, he somehow knew, represented another gift from the Star Weaver, the ability to rest while remaining partially aware, a skill that would prove valuable in circumstances yet to come. Neither fully asleep nor conventionally awake, this third state offered unique advantages when properly cultivated. As Atreus drifted in this peaceful middle state, he perceived the dreams departing the nest far above, hundreds of glowing orbs dispersing like dandelion seeds carried on invisible currents. Each followed its designated path toward a waiting mind, carrying visions that might offer comfort, insight, warning, or simple beauty to its recipient. Some traveled great distances, crossing realm boundaries with apparent ease, while others descended to nearby sleepers within Vanaheim itself. His own contributions joined this great migration, humble but genuine additions to the ancient process of dream weaving. Though their impact might seem small compared to cosmic conflicts or legendary quests, they carried a different kind of significance. Participation in the gentle maintenance of hope and imagination across the realms. In world increasingly dominated by violence and power, preserving capacity for wonder and renewal represented resistance as valid as any martial opposition. The thought brought unexpected contentment. Perhaps true heroism involved not only confronting obvious threats or accomplishing renowned deeds, but also preserving the quieter magics that sustained life's essential rhythms despite surrounding chaos. His mother had embodied this understanding, her considerable powers often expressed through subtle maintenance rather than dramatic demonstration. Even her final request, the journey that had initiated their current quest, reflected this approach, creating transformations through process rather than imposing them through force. As dawn brightened toward full morning, Atreus felt himself settling into deeper rest, genuine sleep claiming him at last. His final conscious awareness was of something hovering briefly above the camp, a small orb of silver pool light, similar to those in the nest, yet distinct in its particular pattern. It pulsed once in what felt like benediction before continuing on its journey, carrying dreams to minds beyond his knowing. Kratos woke to birdsong and strengthening daylight, his warrior's senses immediately assessing their surroundings for potential threat or advantage. Finding neither, he turned his attention to more immediate concerns, rekindling their fire, preparing morning sustenance, planning the day's continued journey through Vanaheim's complex terrain. His movements displayed calibrated efficiency, each action precisely calibrated to achieve maximum effect with minimal expenditure. When he glanced toward his son's sleeping form, he paused momentarily, struck by the unusual serenity evident in the boy's features. Typically a light sleeper prone to restless movements, Atreus now displayed the profound stillness of perfect rest, his breathing deep and regular beneath the furs. Something about his expression suggested dreams of uncommon quality, not the chaotic mental wanderings of ordinary sleep, but experiences carrying genuine significance. "Let him sleep a while longer," Mimir suggested quietly from his position hanging from Kratos' belt. The head had awakened with his carrier but remained uncharacteristically subdued, as if recognizing something significant in the morning's peaceful atmosphere. "The lad seems to be getting rest of uncommon quality." Kratos nodded once, returning to his preparations with characteristic efficiency but reduced noise. Though he would never have admitted such sentiment aloud, something in his son's expression reminded him of moments from his own distant past. Rare instances of uncomplicated peace that stood in stark contrast to the violence and turmoil that had dominated his existence. These moments had grown increasingly rare as his journey progressed, their absence contributing to hardening that had both protected and isolated him from experiences others took for granted. While gathering wood from nearby trees, Kratos noticed unusual patterns in the morning forest. Subtle harmonies in bird songs that typically sounded random, geometric precision in spiderwebs that normally appeared haphazard, correspondence between cloud formations overhead and moss patterns on tree trunks. These observations registered not as conscious catalogue, but as vague impression that something had shifted in the environment, or perhaps in his perception of it. As he knelt to build the fire, brief image flashed through his mind, himself and Atreus standing before a strange doorway, light spilling around their silhouettes as they prepared to step forward together. The vision lasted only moments before dissolving back into ordinary awareness, yet carried emotional weight disproportionate to its duration. Something about it suggested significance beyond mere random mental fluctuation, though its specific meaning remained obscure. While Kratos worked, neither he nor Mimir noticed the faint silver glow that occasionally shimmered around Atreus' closed eyelids. Brief flickers of dream essence manifesting even in daylight, connecting the boy to understanding, normally accessible only in deepest slumber. These momentary illuminations corresponded to particular brainwave patterns associated with heightened integration between conscious and unconscious processes, bridges forming between typically separated aspects of awareness. Nor did they observe the small orb of light that hovered briefly above Kratos himself before dissolving into his unconscious mind. A dream carefully crafted by his son, containing neither prophecy nor instruction, but simply quiet moments of shared purpose, offered without expectation but received nonetheless. This subtle gift would not alter Kratos' fundamental nature or instantly transform long-established patterns, but might occasionally illuminate possibilities previously overlooked, paths potentially available when conditions allowed appropriate reception. In his sleep, Atreus smiled, perceiving without seeing the subtle shift in his father's typically stern expression, a momentary softening that suggested dreams might work their gentle magic even in souls long armored against such influence. Though Kratos would likely never acknowledge such effects consciously, seeds planted in dream soil sometimes produced growth visible only through changed behavior rather than articulated recognition. The morning progressed toward full daylight, sunlight strengthening as it filtered through Vanaheim's dense forests. Though their immediate surroundings remained peaceful, both Kratos and Mimir knew that dangers waited beyond this temporary haven, challenges that would require full attention and considerable strength to navigate successfully. Yet something about the quality of this particular dawn suggested possibility beyond mere survival or task completion, potential for discoveries that might transcend their initial understanding of their journey's purpose. Above, far beyond conventional sight, the Star Weaver's nest continued its eternal rotation, gathering and distributing dreams across the 9 realms with patient dedication. Though its most intense activities occurred during night hours, continuous work maintained the essential balance between conscious and unconscious awareness necessary for healthy function. Among the countless threads forming its structure, a few now carried patterns influenced by a young boy's brief visit. Small but genuine contributions to the vast tapestry, connecting all dreamers across the boundaries of realm, race, and circumstance. And in the space between sleeping and waking, where imagination bridges conscious intention and unconscious wisdom, new possibilities took root. Not as fixed prophecies demanding fulfillment, but as potential paths awaiting choices yet unmade, dreams yet to be woven, stories yet to unfold beneath the watching stars. No single visit or momentary insight could guarantee particular outcomes, but each created subtle influence that might, under proper circumstances, contribute to transformations beyond current imagining. As Atreus slept on, his dreams now flowing in natural cycles rather than extraordinary vision, something of the night's experience remained active within him, a quiet certainty that connections existed beyond ordinary perception, that seemingly separate journeys formed essential strands within greater pattern, that endings often concealed beginnings waiting to emerge when conventional vision gave way to deeper seeing. This understanding would accompany him through waking life, occasionally illuminating moments when ordinary perception proved insufficient for challenges encountered. Kratos, finishing his morning preparations, glanced once more at his sleeping son. Though he lacked words or conceptual framework for what he observed, something about the boy's presence stirred recognition of truths long buried beneath necessary armor, reminders that strength manifested in multiple forms, that vulnerability sometimes revealed paths inaccessible to force alone, that connection sustained as surely as barriers protected. These insights would not change him overnight, or erase the consequences of his long and violent history, but might occasionally inform choices at crucial junctions, where multiple paths remained genuinely available. And so the dawn completed its transition into day, temporary peace giving way to necessary journey, rest yielding to resumed effort. Yet something of the night's magic lingered in altered perception, in dreams remembered at unexpected moments, in connections glimpsed between apparently separate phenomena. The Star Weaver's quiet work continued beneath more dramatic narratives of gods and mortals, weaving together experiences that sustained hope, fostered renewal, preserved wonder in a world increasingly dominated by power and its consequences. For ultimately, as Faye had understood and attempted to convey to both husband and son in her different ways, the seemingly small magics often proved most essential. The quiet workings that maintained capacity for growth and transformation, even in darkest circumstance. Dreams, with their fluid boundaries and creative recombinations, represented not escape from reality, but rather approach to its deeper currents, access to wisdom generally obscured by waking minds' necessary focus on immediate survival. As Atreus finally stirred toward wakefulness, the gift received within the nest continued its subtle influence. Not dramatic power, but deepened connection, enhanced perception, occasional glimpses beyond surface appearance. These qualities would serve him well in challenges yet to come, illuminating possibilities that might otherwise remain concealed by convention or assumption. Not separate from his journey with Kratos, but integral to it, another layer of understanding contributing to their shared path. And somewhere beyond ordinary perception, the silver threads continued their eternal weaving, creating patterns that connected minds and hearts across apparent boundaries, dream by dream, night by night, gradually revealing the fundamental unity underlying apparent separation. This work required no recognition to continue its essential function, yet occasionally revealed itself to those prepared to perceive beyond conventional limitation. In such moments, as Atreus had discovered beneath the northern stars, ordinary existence revealed extraordinary dimensions hidden within its seemingly mundane appearance. Magic not imposed from outside, but revealed from within. Dreams not separate from reality, but essential to its complete manifestation. And so our journey through the realms draws to a close for tonight. May Hypnos, god of sleep, watch over you as you drift through dreams of legendary proportions. If these tales of gods and monsters helped guide you to restful sleep, consider supporting our journey by liking this video and subscribing to the channel. Your support gives me the strength to continue sharing these stories night after night. Remember, these videos play uninterrupted through the night, with no ads to disturb your slumber, just the soothing sounds of mythic realms to accompany your dreams. For those seeking passage to exclusive content, our Patreon offers early access to all videos and special playlists crafted to enhance your sleep. The link awaits in the description below. Until our next journey together, may your sleep be deep, your dreams be mighty, and your rest be undisturbed by the conflicts of gods and men. Sleep well, brave one.